Section 17 of Essays of Schopenhauer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kendra Hurst. Essays of Schopenhauer by Arthur Schopenhauer. Translated by Sarah Hay Dirks. Psychological Observations, Part 1. Every animal, and especially man, requires in order to exist and get on in the world a certain fitness and proportion between his will and his intellect. The more exact and true this fitness and proportion are by nature, the easier, safer, and pleasanter it will be for him to get through the world. At the same time, a mere approximation to this exact point will protect him from destruction. There is, in consequence, a certain scope within the limits of exactness and fitness of this so-called proportion. The normal proportion is as follows. As the object of the intellect is to be the light and guide of the will on its path, the more violent, impetuous, and passionate the inner force of the will, the more perfect and clear must be the intellect which belongs to it, so that the ardent efforts of the will, the glow of passion, the vehemence of affection, may not lead a man astray or drive him to do things that he has not given his consideration, or are wrong or will ruin him, which will infallibly be the case when a very strong will is combined with a very weak intellect. On the other hand, a phlegmatic character, that is to say, a weak and feeble will, can agree and get on with little intellect. A moderate will only requires a moderate intellect. In general, any disproportion between the will and the intellect, that is to say, any deviation from the normal proportion referred to, tends to make a man unhappy, and the same thing happens when the disproportion is reversed. The development of the intellect to an abnormal degree of strength and superiority, thereby making it out of all proportion to the will, a condition which constitutes the essence of true genius, is not only superfluous, but actually an impediment to the needs and purposes of life. This means that, in youth, excessive energy in grasping the objective world, accompanied by a lively imagination and little experience, makes the mind susceptible to exaggerated ideas and a prey even to chimeras, and this results in an eccentric and even fantastic character. And when, later, this condition of mind no longer exists and succumbs to the teachings of experience, the genius will never feel so much at home or take up his position in the everyday world or in civic life, and move with the ease of a man of normal intellect. Indeed, he is often more apt to make curious mistakes, for the ordinary mind is so perfectly at home in the narrow circle of its own ideas and way of grasping things that no one can control it in that circle. Its capacities always remain true to their original purpose, namely, to look after the service of the will. Therefore, it applies itself unceasingly to this end without ever going beyond it. While the genius, as I have stated, is at bottom monstrum per excessum, just as conversely, the passionate, violent, and unintelligent man, the brainless savage, is monstrum per dejectum. The will to live, which forms the innermost kernel of every living being, is most distinctly apparent in the highest, that is to say, in the cleverest order of animals, and therefore in them we may see and consider the nature of the will most clearly. For below this order of animals the will is not so prominent, and has a less degree of objectification, but above the higher order of animals, I mean in men, we get reason, and with reason, reflection, and with this the faculty for dissimulation, which immediately throws a veil over the actions of the will. But in outbursts of affection and passion the will exhibits itself unveiled. This is precisely why passion, when it speaks, always carries conviction, whatever the passion may be, and rightly so. For the same reason, the passions are the principal theme of poets and the stalking horse of actors, and it is because the will is most striking in the lower class of animals that we may account for our delight in dogs, apes, cats, etc. It is the absolute naivete of all their expressions which charms us so much. What a peculiar pleasure it affords us to see any free animal looking after its own welfare unhindered, finding its food or taking care of its young, or associating with others of its kind, and so on. This is exactly what ought to be and can be. Be it only a bird, I can look at it for some time with a feeling of pleasure. Nay, a water rat or a frog, and with still greater pleasure a hedgehog, a weasel, a roe, or a deer. The contemplation of animals delights us so much, principally because we see in them our own existence very much simplified. There is only one mendacious creature in the world, man. Every other is true and genuine, for it shows itself as it is, and expresses itself just as it feels. An emblematic or allegorical expression of this fundamental difference is to be found in the fact that all animals go about in their natural state. This largely accounts for the happy impression they make on us when we look at them, and as far as I myself am concerned, my heart always goes out to them, particularly if they are free animals. Man, on the other hand, by his silly dress becomes a monster. His very appearance is objectionable, enhanced by the unnatural paleness of his complexion, the nauseating effect of his eating meat, of his drinking alcohol, his smoking, dissoluteness, and ailments. He stands out as a blot on nature. and it was because the Greeks were conscious of this that they restricted themselves as far as possible in the matter of dress. Much that is attributed to force of habit ought rather to be put down to the constancy and immutability of original innate character, whereby we always do the same thing under the same circumstances, which happens the first as for the 100th time in consequence of the same necessity, while force of habit, in reality, is solely due to indolence, seeking to save the intellect, and the will to work, difficulty, and danger of making a fresh choice, so that we are made to do today what we did yesterday, and have done 100 times before, and of which we know that it will gain its end. But the truth of the matter lies deeper, for it can be explained more clearly than appears at first sight. The power of inertia applied to bodies, which may be moved by mechanical means only, becomes force of habit when applied to bodies which are moved by motives. The actions which we do out of sheer force of habit occur, as a matter of fact, without any individual separate motive exercised for the particular case. Hence, we do not really think of them. It was only when each action at first took place that it had a motive. After that, it became a habit. The secondary after effect of this motive is the present habit, which is sufficient to carry on the action. Just as the body, set in motion by a push, does not need another push in order to enable it to continue its motion. It will continue in motion forever if it is not obstructed in any way. The same thing applies to animals. Training is a habit which is forced upon them. The horse draws a cart along contentedly without being urged to do so. This motion is still the effect of those lashes with the whip which incited him at first, but which by the law of inertia have become perpetuated as habit. There is really something more in all this than a mere parable. It is the identity of the thing in question, that is to say of the will, at very different degrees of its objectification, by which the same law of motion takes such different forms. Viva muchos años is the ordinary greeting in Spain, and it is usual throughout the whole world to wish people a long life. It is not a knowledge of what life is that explains the origin of such a wish, but rather knowledge of what man is in his real nature, namely, the will to live. The wish which everyone has that he may be remembered after his death, and which those people with aspirations have for posthumous fame, seems to me to arise from this tenacity to life. When they see themselves cut off from every possibility of real existence, they struggle after a life which is still within their reach, even if it is only an ideal, that is to say, an unreal one. We wish, more or less, to get to the end of everything we are interested in or occupied with. We are impatient to get to the end of it, and glad when it is finished. It is only the general end, the end of all ends, that we wish, as a rule, as far off as possible. Every separation gives a foretaste of death, and every meeting a foretaste of the resurrection. This explains why even people who were indifferent to each other rejoice so much when they meet again after the lapse of 20 or 30 years. The deep sorrow we feel on the death of a friend springs from the feeling that in every individual there is a something which we cannot define, which is his alone and therefore irreparable. Omne individum ineffable. The same applies to individual animals. A man who has by accident fatally wounded a favorite animal feels the most acute sorrow, and the animal's dying look causes him infinite pain. It is possible for us to grieve over the death of our enemies and adversaries, even after the lapse of a long time, almost as much as over the death of our friends, that is to say, if we miss them as witnesses of our brilliant success. That the sudden announcement of some good fortune may easily have a fatal effect on us is due to the fact that our happiness and unhappiness depend upon the relation of our demands to what we get. Accordingly, the good things we possess or are quite sure of possessing are not felt to be such because the nature of all enjoyment is really only negative, and has only the effect of annulling pain, whilst, on the other hand, the nature of pain or evil is really positive and felt immediately. With the possession or the certain prospect of it, our demands instantly rise and increase our desire for further possession and greater prospects. But if the mind is depressed by continual misfortune and the claims reduced to a minimum, good fortune that comes suddenly finds no capacity for its acceptance. Neutralized by no previous claims, it now has apparently a positive effect, and accordingly its whole power is exercised. Hence it may disorganize the mind, that is to say, be fatal to it. This is why, as is well known, one is so careful to get a man first to hope for happiness before announcing it, then to suggest the prospect of it, then little by little make it known, until gradually all is known to him. Every proportion of the revelation loses the strength of its effect because it is anticipated by a demand, and room is still left for more. In virtue of all this, it might be said that our stomach for good fortune is bottomless, but the entrance to it is narrow. What has been said does not apply to sudden misfortunes in the same way. Since hope always resists them, they are for this reason rarely fatal. That fear does not perform an analogous office in cases of good fortune is due to the fact that we are instinctively more inclined to hope than to fear, just as our eyes turn of themselves to light in preference to darkness. Hope is to confuse the desire that something should occur with the probability that it will. Perhaps no man is free from this folly of the heart, which deranges the intellect's correct estimation of probability to such a degree as to make him think the event quite possible, even if the chances are only 1,000 to 1. And still, an unexpected misfortune is like a speedy death-stroke, while a hope that is always frustrated and yet springs into life again is like death by slow torture. He who has given up hope has also given up fear. This is the meaning of the expression desperate. It is natural for a man to have faith in what he wishes, and to have faith in it because he wishes it. If this peculiarity of his nature, which is both beneficial and comforting, is eradicated by repeated hard blows of fate, and he is brought to a converse condition, when he believes that something must happen because he does not wish it, and what he wishes can never happen just because he wishes it, this is, in reality, the state which has been called desperation. That we are so often mistaken in others is not always precisely due to our faulty judgment, but springs, as a rule, as Bacon says, from intellectus luminis sixi non est sect recipit infusionem a voluntate et effectibus. For without knowing it, we are influenced for or against them by trifles from the very beginning. It also often lies in the fact that we do not adhere to the qualities which we really discover in them, but conclude from these that there are others which we consider inseparable from, or at any rate incompatible with, them. For instance, when we discern generosity, we conclude there is honesty. From lying, we conclude there is deception. From deception, stealing, and so on. And this opens the door to many errors, partly because of the peculiarity of human nature, and partly because of the one-sidedness of our point of view. It is true that character is always consistent and connected, but the roots of all its qualities lies too deep to enable one to decide from special data in a given case which qualities can and which cannot exist together. The use of the word person in every European language to signify a human individual is unintentionally appropriate. Persona really means a player's mask, and it is quite certain that no one shows himself as he is, but that each wears a mask and plays a role. In general, the whole of social life is a continual comedy, which the worthy find insipid, whilst the stupid delight in it greatly. It often happens that we blurt out things that may in some kind of way be harmful to us, but we are silent about things that may make us look ridiculous, because in this case effect follows very quickly on cause. The ordinary man who has suffered injustice burns with a desire for revenge, and it has often been said that revenge is sweet. This is confirmed by the many sacrifices made merely for the sake of enjoying revenge, without any intention of making good the injury that one has suffered. The centaur Nessus utilized his last moments in devising an extremely clever revenge, and the fact that it was certain to be effective sweetened an otherwise bitter death. The same idea, presented in a more modern and plausible way, occurs in Bertolotti's novel, Le Deux Sorel, which has been translated into 3 languages. Walter Scott expresses mankind's proneness to revenge in words as powerful as they are true. Vengeance is the sweetest morsel to the mouth that ever was cooked in hell. I shall now attempt a psychological explanation of revenge. All the suffering that nature, chance, or fate have assigned to us does not, ceteris paribus, pain us so much as suffering which is brought upon us by the arbitrary will of another. This is due to the fact that we regard nature and fate as the original rulers of the world. We look upon what befalls us through them as something that might have befallen everyone else. Therefore, in a case of suffering which arises from this source, we bemoan the fate of mankind in general more than we do our own. On the other hand, suffering inflicted on us through the arbitrary will of another is a peculiarly bitter addition to the pain or injury caused, as it involves the consciousness of another's superiority, whether it be in strength or cunning, as opposed to our own weakness. If compensation is possible, it wipes out the injury, but that bitter addition, I must submit to that from you, which often hurts more than the injury itself, is only to be neutralized by vengeance. For by injuring the man who has injured us, whether it be by force or cunning, we show our superiority, and thereby annul the proof of his. This gives that satisfaction to the mind for which it has been thirsting. Accordingly, where there is much pride or vanity, there will be a great desire for revenge. But as the fulfillment of every wish proves to be more or less a delusion, so is also the wish for revenge. The expected enjoyment is mostly embittered by pity. Nay, gratified revenge will often lacerate the heart and torment the mind, for the motive which prompts the feeling of it is no longer active, and what is left is the testimony of our wickedness. The pain of an ungratified desire is small compared with that of repentance, for the former has to face the immeasurable, open future, the latter the past, which is closed irrevocably. Money is human happiness in abstracto, so that a man who is no longer capable of enjoying it in concrete gives up his whole heart to it. Moroseness and melancholy are very opposite in nature, and melancholy is more nearly related to happiness than to moroseness. Melancholy attracts, moroseness repels. Hypochondria not only makes us unreasonably cross and angry over things concerning the present, not only fills us with groundless fears of imaginative mishaps for the future, but also causes us to unjustly reproach ourselves concerning our actions in the past.
Hypochondria causes a man to be always searching for and racking his brain about things that either irritate or torment him. The cause of it is an internal morbid depression, combined often with an inward restlessness which is temperamental. When both are developed to their utmost, suicide is the result. What makes a man hard-hearted is this, that each man has, or fancies he has, sufficient in his own troubles to bear. This is why people placed in happier circumstances than they have been used to are sympathetic and charitable. But people who have always been placed in happy circumstances are often the reverse. They have become so estranged to suffering that they have no longer any sympathy with it, and hence it happens that the poor sometimes show themselves more benevolent than the rich. On the other hand, what makes a man so very curious, as may be seen in the way he will spy into other people's affairs, is boredom, a condition which is diametrically opposed to suffering, though envy also often helps in creating curiosity.
At times, it seems as though we wish for something and at the same time do not wish for it, so that we are at once both pleased and troubled about it. For instance, if we have to undergo some decisive test in some affair or other, in which to come off victorious is of great importance to us, we both wish that the time to be tested were here, and yet dread the idea of its coming. If it happens that the time, for once in a way, is postponed, we are both pleased and sorry, for although the postponement was unexpected, it, however, gives us momentary relief. We have the same kind of feeling when we expect an important letter containing some decision of moment and it fails to come. In cases like these, we are really controlled by two different motives. The stronger but more remote being the desire to stand the test, and to have the decision given in our favor. The weaker, which is closer at hand, the desire to be left in peace and undisturbed for the present, and consequently in further enjoyment of the advantage that hoping on in uncertainty has over what might possibly be an unhappy issue. Consequently, in this case, the same happens to our moral vision as to our physical, when a smaller object near at hand conceals from view a bigger object some distance away. The course and affairs of our individual life, in view of their true meaning and connection, are like a piece of crude work in mosaic. So long as one stands close in front of it, one cannot correctly see the objects presented, or perceive their importance and beauty. It is only by standing some distance away that both come into view, and in the same way one often understands the true connection of important events in one's own life, not while they are happening, or even immediately after they have happened, but only a long time afterwards. Is this so because we require the magnifying power of imagination? Or because a general view can only be got by looking from a distance? Or because one's emotions would otherwise carry one away? Or because it is only the school of experience that ripens our judgment? Perhaps all these combined. But it is certain that it is only after many years that we see the actions of others, and sometimes even our own, in their true light. And as it is in one's own life, so it is in history. Why is it, in spite of all the mirrors in existence, no man really knows what he looks like, and therefore cannot picture in his mind his own person as he pictures that of an acquaintance? This is a difficulty which is thwarted at the very outset by nothi sauton, know thyself. This is undoubtedly partly due to the fact that a man can only see himself in the glass by looking straight towards it and remaining quite still, whereby the play of the eye, which is so important, and the real characteristic of the face is, to a great extent, lost. But cooperating with this physical impossibility, there appears to be an ethical impossibility analogous to it. A man cannot regard the reflection of his own face in the glass as if it were the face of someone else, which is the condition of his seeing himself objectively. This objective view rests with a profound feeling on the egoist's part, as a moral being, that what he is looking at is not himself, which is requisite for his perceiving all his defects, as they really are from a purely objective point of view, and not until then can he see his face reflected as it really and truly is. Instead of that, when a man sees his own person in the glass, the egoistic side of him always whispers, "It is not somebody else, but I myself," which has the effect of a noli me tangere, and prevents his taking a purely objective view. Without the leaven of a grain of malice, it does not seem possible to look at oneself objectively. No one knows what capacities he possesses for suffering and doing until an opportunity occurs to bring them into play, any more than he imagines when looking into a perfectly smooth pond with a mirror-like surface that it can tumble and toss and rush from rock to rock, or leap as high into the air as a fountain, any more than in ice-cold water he suspects latent warmth. That line of Ovid's, "Pronaque cum spectant animalia cetra terram," is only applicable in its true physical sense to animals, but in a figurative and spiritual sense, unfortunately, to the great majority of men too. Their thoughts and aspirations are entirely devoted to physical enjoyment and physical welfare, or to various personal interests which receive their importance from their relation to the former, but they have no interests beyond these. This is not only shown in their way of living and speaking, but also in their look, the expression of their physiognomy, their gait and gesticulations. Everything about them proclaims in terram prona. Consequently, it is not to them, but only to those nobler and more highly endowed natures, those men who really think and observe things round them, and are the exceptions in the human race, that the following lines are applicable. As homini sublime dedit colacum tueri, jusit et erectos ad sedere tolere voltus. End of section 17. Recording by Kendra Hurst.